Dr. Khullar, Your Excellency, High Commissioner, Vice Dean, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to welcome you to this interaction with Dr. Rahul Khullar, who is the Commerce Secretary, it's equivalent to the Permanent Secretary for Foreign Trade for the Government of India. Dr. Khullar is an economist by training. We share the same alma mater, the Delhi School of Economics. Has a PhD in economics from Boston. Has worked at the ADB on trade issues. And in that sense, for the last 10 months that he has been our trade secretary, he is really the right person for that job. He has a lot of experience in that position. India has had a very interesting relationship with foreign trade. As some of you know, we started off with this export pessimism, and I think some of our intelligentsias and policymakers still believe that foreign trade is pretty much like a tail which shouldn't wag the dog. But the fact of the matter is that today we have one of the world's biggest economies. By some reckoning, certainly one of the top 5 economies in the world. Yet our foreign trade is less than 2% of world trade. Our exports still haven't touched the $200 billion mark, whereas comparisons are inevitable, and a country like China has about 7 times that number. Dr. Khullar is now driving our trade policy, which includes, of course, our negotiations, our very difficult and protracted negotiations in the Doha round, on which he'll be talking. But Dr. Khullar has also very kindly agreed to have a more broad-ranging discussion on the future of India's foreign trade policies, which of course also includes a rather interesting, if I may put it, issue of the special economic zones, and in general enlighten us about what's happening with foreign trade, when our exports are going to pick up, what's going to happen to Doha round. And we are also very grateful that he's sharing this time with us because he's come here on a very tight schedule, and I just learned that he's going to be on his way to the airport from here. So Dr. Khullar, without further ado, a warm welcome to the LKY school. Please.
Dr. Gupta, High Commissioner, Vice Dean, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very deeply honored to have been given the opportunity to speak at this forum and in a university setting. It is truly a great privilege, and I do not have words with which to thank you for giving me that privilege. It is not that I have not spoken at universities before, but most of the time it's with in front of a blackboard and with a chalk stick in my hand, and with an audience, if I may say, whose presence is not entirely voluntary. So today is different in that I trust all of you here are actually coming to hear what Doha is all about. I also did not anticipate that it would turn into open season, but now that Dr. Gupta has said that I am available to answer questions on anything under the sun, well, so be it. What I will try to do is, in the space of about 25 minutes to 30 minutes, I want to walk you through some parts of Doha to give you a feel for something which you may not have read in the papers or unlikely to have ever seen in the newspapers. And then I will stop altogether and then leave it open to you to decide how you wish to use the rest of the time for the discussion. Let me begin by saying that for those of you who've done any amount of trade theory, and I did a fair amount of it both at college and at my PhD level, Doha has nothing to do with what we learn in the classroom at all. So please forget everything that you learned in the classroom, throw it away into the dustbin. It has nothing to do with Doha. For that matter, it has nothing to do with multilateral trade negotiations. In our economist world, trade is driven by a Ricardian or a Heckscher-Ohlin type of world, or at best a product differentiation type of model attributable to various people, including the Krugman type of geographical models. But they all seem to presume that trade automatically, once the good is produced, will automatically take place. In that world, the tariffs are merely a Tao or what have you, nothing else. And non-tariff barriers don't exist. There is no such thing as SPS. And trade in services, we haven't quite come to theoretically damaging yet, just yet. So as a profession, we've not done too badly. Doha, on the contrary, is about everything else, which is how practically business is to be transacted. Now, I'm going to presume everybody knows what's on the Doha agenda, and I'm not going to dwell at any great length about it. All of you should be familiar that there's an ag negotiation, there's a NAMA negotiation. NAMA means non-agricultural market access. There's a negotiation on trade facilitation, there's one on rules, there's one on environment goods, and all of it is one grand single undertaking. Let me explain a few terms before I go on. Single undertaking. Single undertaking means nothing's done till everything's done, which means I can come to an agreement with you on agriculture, I can come to an agreement with you on NAMA, but if we are stuck on trade facilitation, the deal's over, there's no deal. It's still everything, every single piece has to fall into place for a deal to be concluded. So it's what you would call an all or nothing type of situation you're dealing with. Now, essentially what has happened in Doha is a large number of multilateral trade negotiation issues spilled over from the Uruguay round, and those got picked up as part of Doha. For instance, agriculture liberalization basically just started in the Uruguay round, and the Doha round is taking it much, much further. The NAMA negotiations, which are the traditional bread and butter of GATT, industrial tariff negotiations, have taken a completely different turn, because what you're not doing is you're not doing straight line cuts and small little giveaways. You're talking about drastic cuts in industrial tariffs. Similarly, rules covers an entirely different area of anti-dumping and subsidies. These are the anti-dumping agreement and the agreement on subsidies and countervailing measures. Rules also covers, surprisingly, a discussion on environmental subsidies, which is essentially the fishery subsidy discussion is going on there. Then you have environmental goods, which is a completely separate discussion, which is on exchange of goods which will help the environment per se. And can we identify a set of goods which are good for the environment, the promotion of trade for which would be globally good, and therefore can we unilaterally agree to reduce tariffs across the board. Now, those are some of the big issues up in the air. Let me tell you what essentially happened. Up till July 2008, we were trying to get to a deal on what is called Ag and NAMA. And Ag and NAMA, what are called modalities, would essentially be agricultural and non-agricultural market access modalities. Means what do we agree to do? Do we agree to reduce tariffs? Do we agree how much is going to go into the blue box? How much is going to be the percentage of tariff lines which will be sensitive products? Will there be tariff simplification or not? On NAMA, if you are going to cut tariffs using a Swiss formula which drastically cuts tariffs, then what protection are you going to provide through by way of special and differential treatment, both for developing countries in general as well as for special classes of developing countries such as the small and vulnerable economies, etc., etc., etc. Now, the whole idea was this: get Ag and NAMA done. That's the big chunk of the trade liberalization that you're going to effect. And once you've got that sorted out, then we will back end and start doing the other stuff. So that in a way, what you were doing was the ministers had mandated a sequence: get Ag and NAMA closed, then we'll come to the rest. Problem: as long as it's a single undertaking, if I have aggressive interests, for instance, is trade and services, I don't exactly know what I want to give away in Ag and NAMA before I have to give away, before I get what I need in services. Many prickly issues, but in any case, bottom line, the Ag and NAMA modalities could not be clinched. The ministerial in July 2008 ended in a disaster. There was a fair amount of finger pointing, some at India, some at the US, some at China. I don't want to go to the finger pointing part of it. The single point I wish to make is that there was a very large number of still outstanding issues that needed to be settled. And I will refer to those issues as headline issues. That is, these were the big 5, 6 issues on which you needed closure if you were going to get the deal done. What happened after July 2008 to March 2010? Well, between August, when they took a vacation, from September 2008 to December 2008, essentially headway was made on what is called the Special Safeguard Mechanism and other provisions in the Agriculture Agreement. But it got bogged down completely on the NAMA negotiation on what is called a sectoral. Let me explain what a sectoral is for those of you who don't know. What was happening was that tariffs were going to be reduced by a Swiss formula in a very large amount. So, for instance, you would have tariffs falling from 100 or 500% to 20% overnight. Now, when tariffs fell that much, the question was, this was going to come about because of the general modality, the agreement on the Swiss formula. Could we do just that little bit more on a voluntary basis in a sector of concern to everybody? So, for instance, just like we had the information technology agreement, could we identify, say, a chemicals agreement or electronic hardware agreement or a gems and jewelry agreement, where on a voluntary basis countries would sign up and voluntarily reduce tariffs below the drastic cuts already agreed to as part of the modalities. Now, that's where talks essentially broke down in November. The major demanders for sectorals, the major demander for the sectorals was the US. And by that time, November 2008 was a very difficult time for them. They put maximalist demands on the table. There was no way those were ever going to be ceded. Talks stopped. And then talks stayed stopped for the better part of 2009 till June. At a Cairns Group meeting in June at Bali, it was decided, look, why don't we try to vaguely revive the round? Let me give you the political background to all this. What was happening was that, and all of you have watched that happen in the news, the G20 was meeting, and apart from talking about the global crisis and stimulus, etc., one of the things they were saying was, what better fix to the global crisis than if you could close a Doha deal, because if you close Doha, you would liberalize and move on. So you had this sort of amusing posture where G20 meeting after G20 meeting, leaders would come and sort of say, we must get Doha done, we must get Doha done. And nothing really got done. So it was almost farcical that we were going through this motion of leaders saying, let's get it done, and Geneva was at complete standstill, meaning nothing was happening there. At that point of time, India offered that we would host a ministerial meeting, saying, look guys, let's get 100+ ministers around a room and figure out, do you really want to get this done or not? Because it's not a question of G20. The agenda which is driving Doha is different. The members of the WTO are different from what the G20 is. And therefore, unless you have those guys on board, what's the point of G20 leaders telling the rest of the world we're going to get it done? It ain't going to get done that way. They met in September, and there was the, pardon my saying, usual rah-rah affair. But the good thing was that I think across the board everybody agreed, yeah, we actually do want to get this done. And it didn't matter which minister came, small country, big country, giant country, developed country, developing country, island country, cut it any which way you like. Everybody said get it done. They passed sort of unanimously a resolution that let's get this ball rolling. So they basically sent their senior negotiators back to Geneva and said start negotiating all over again and come and get to grips with those 4 or 5 headline issues. What's happened between then and now? Pretty well damn nothing. Between September and November, people just kept going, and they did what in parlance is called technical discussions. For those of you not familiar with technical discussions, you take any subject, I can have a technical discussion on it for about a year to 2 with you and not get anywhere. You want to negotiate a deal, now that's a different matter altogether. So what essentially was happening was you had to tell the rest of the world you're engaged. Yeah, we're engaged. What are you doing? We're doing technical discussions. Are technical discussions good? Sure, technical discussions are good. Are you any closer to a deal? No way. And we put up through this sham of not calling a spade because who would want to say that actually we were pulling a con? Now, that's actually what happened up till the first week of December. When the ministerial conference was held, naturally, there was, faces looking here and there, meaning, what the hell's going on? Nothing's happened. And there was going to be a fall guy. We all know who that fall guy was going to be. The answer very simply was that between up till November, in fact, why speak to November, even March 2010, we still don't have US negotiators in the room. Now, the hard part of it is very simple. If we're in a room and a key negotiator is missing, who are you going to negotiate with? Surely not yourself. And that was the crux of it. I think up till November, people were giving time and just being patient. Hey, look, guys, you guys need to get through your senatorial confirmation or whatever it is you have to do, but get people here. Because somebody has to come to the table and start talking. You can't hold up an entire deal. And the mood in the end of November was very fractious. I was there at the conference. I don't know what got reported in the press, but it was sort of stage managed so that no fracas broke out. But bottom line, there was no engagement, nothing happened. Then they said get something done as ASAP. That's what they've been trying to do. It's March 2010, nothing has been done. Now, that is the position you're in today. What are the problems that lie ahead? 2 big political problems. Number 1, the ministerial conference said we will have a stock taking at the end of March, early April. Stock taking means how much further progress have you made? And the second was that the G20, which was held in Pittsburgh, said ministers will also do a stock taking, which means after the senior officials have a go at it, ministers will have a stab at it before they meet in June 2010 in Toronto for the G20 meeting. So those are your future parametric dates that we are looking to. And let me tell you where we are. Number 1, the last available text, all negotiations are based on a text. The last available agriculture and NAMA texts are dated to December 2008. They have not moved an inch from then. There's lots of nice technical work, but there's nothing else. You are now in what I would like to call crunch time. by the end of March, senior officials have to go and take stock, which means at the end of March, my chief negotiator at Geneva has to visit, come back and announce to the rest of the world, yippee, we got it done, or oops, we screwed it up again. And that is why March is going to be an extremely difficult month, because it is now make or break time. Either you get something actually going in terms of negotiations, because if you don't, there at the end of the day, there's nothing to show in March. If there's nothing to show in at the end of March, we have a problem. Second, if we have a problem then a ministers' meeting is going to be scheduled, saying please rejig this operation so it starts moving again. When that happens, and that would be any time between, my guess is first week of May, and this is pure speculation, I have no idea about these dates, then ministers will put the pressure on, saying, for Christ's sake, get something done in the month of April. The point I'm trying to make is that you've come to a pass where now, in the next 3 months, you're going to see frenetic activity, and you're probably going to see even more hectic activity in April, and you have to keep your fingers crossed. Do not make the same mistake which we have made earlier, that frenetic activity in Geneva is a sign of progress. Frenetic activity takes place in Geneva without much ado at all, and without much as an outcome. I trust there's nobody from the media here. Anyway, so that's what's on the agenda for what you're going to see in March, April, and this thing. And you'll understand why I'm giving you this breakup. Essentially, what I've tried to do is walk you through what has happened in the negotiating history of Doha, what has happened in the last 6 months. Now I'm going to ask 2 questions, both of which are very important. Can Doha be done, and why it must be done? 2 separate issues. Let me take the first one first. Can it or can it not be done? Now, when you want to put your head to getting a negotiation brought to closure, it can be done in less than 10 days. I assure you that I have been inside a room smaller than this, a dozen major countries in April and May of 2008, complete logjam on agriculture, on NAMA. And essentially what these 12 countries decided was throw everybody else out of the room. And we went into, we rotated the meeting in different embassies in Geneva, and we sat down, just the same 12 people in a room, morning to evening, Saturday to Sunday, no break. Take 2 days off, go home, change your clothes, come back. Literally, fly back to Delhi, change your clothes, come back, and we start all over again. And in 8 weeks, we were that close to a deal. So the bottom line answer is, can it be done? Yes, it can be done. Can it be done in 8 weeks? Yes, it can be done in 8 weeks. But if you want to get it done in 8 weeks, there are prerequisites. Number one, the US has to be at the table. You have to be ready with saying, this is the point from which I start, and here are the 5 headline issues I've got to grapple with. If you are not willing to talk about how to solve SSM, special products, sensitive products, tariff simplification, OTDS, sectorals, please leave. There is no way out. This deal is not going through. Those are the 5 or 6 minutes. I have mentioned sectorals to you already. I think all of you know about SSM. I'll happily answer questions, any technical questions you have on these subjects later. The point I'm making is not what the issue is. The point is to recognize, here are these 5 issues. For 1.5 years, since December, we have been dodging dealing with them. Now, if you're serious and you want to actually close the deal, come around and start dealing with them. Otherwise, please tell the world you're pulling a con on them. And there can be no I don't wish to mince my words on that. That's really what it's all about. Let me amplify the question by saying, can it be done? Not can it be done in 8 weeks, can it be done in 2010? And now it means not the Agenama modalities, I am talking about the Doha deal. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with how the legality works, essentially what happens is that once the modalities are written up, which means all of us are countries and we have agreed, all right, you're going to cut tariffs by so much, you'll do this, you'll do that, we put this aside and we start negotiations on other matters. Let me come to this first, this later and this first. What's left? I've got services negotiations to complete. I've got rules to complete. I've got environment. I've got trade facilitation. I've got environmental goods. I've got a whole slew of other things. So what I have to do is tell everybody in this room, okay guys, you go to that room and start on trade facilitation. You go there, start services. You break out into 6 groups and start working the texts out on those. I then do a separate thing. I take this piece of paper and I call the lawyers. And I tell the lawyers, guys, this is it, convert it into legalese. All right? Then I take the same thing and I give it to each of the 153 countries and tell them, go back to your headquarters and start scheduling. What is the schedule? Let me give you an example, you understand what I mean. Supposing I have agreed that agricultural tariffs will be cut by 40% across the board, tariff line by line. And there's an implementation period of 5 years with a grace period of 3 years. So over an 8-year period, I have to implement it. I now have to go back and draw up line by tariff line by tariff line. This is my tariff today. This will be my tariff in 2010, 11, 12, 14, 15, 19, 20. And I have to do it for each of the tariff lines, which means if I'm just looking at HSN 8-digit, you're looking at 12,000 tariff lines. Okay? That's just one part of scheduling. Scheduling covers lots of other aspects which are all contained in this. What will be your special products? What will be your sensitive products? What will be your tariff rate quota on sugar? Will Japan give, what will be the in-quota tariff on Japan's rice quota? I can answer 1,000 questions. The point is to see what's got to be done. This has to be converted into legal language and it has to be converted into schedules of commitments by member countries, even as countries continue this negotiation in the other room. Okay. How long does it take this to get done? The lawyers take 6 months. Sorry, no offense to the lawyers. They probably tell you that it will take more, but right now 6 months. This takes roughly about 4 to 5 months in terms of scheduling. Okay? This negotiation can be done in less than 6 months. Okay? Now you know why I am saying can it be done? Yes, of course it can be done. What's the timeline? Well, you have to give me a minimum of 6 months before 31st December to close the deal, which means I've got to give my lawyer 6 months, I have to give time for scheduling, and I have to bring this to closure. What is the outermost date I can achieve this by? No later than 30th June. So if I don't have this piece of paper when modality is closed by 30th of June, there's no deal. Not by 31st of December, there's not. You may have the Agenama modalities closed, but you will not have a deal by the 31st of December. And you want this closed earlier, so much the better. Let me give you what I think, push comes to shove. The absolute last date by which the modalities have to be in place, no later than 31st July. Why? On August 1st, Europe goes on holiday. WTO shuts down for a month. There is no work. So nothing's going to happen. Which means 30th June, my practical outer limit. 31st July, absolute outer limit. If you ain't there by July, thank you very much. Anybody who's telling you this deal is getting done by December, I think you know exactly what to say to him or her. Right? Now I come to the question, I think I've tried at least to answer the question, can it be done? Let me try to answer the more, in a sense, philosophically more compelling question, why it must be done. I think there are 2 or 3 reasons, depending on which school of thought you belong to, you can pick and choose what you would like to believe. From the pure economist's persuasion, the argument is very simple. The point is, it does not matter whether there is any great liberalization at stake in terms of a huge opening in terms of market access. The point is, you can lock in the reduction in bounds to prevent any future reversions. Those of you who know the negotiation, all WTO negotiations are about bound levels of tariffs. So if I have a tariff which is bound at 100%, legally I could be applying a tariff of 20, but at any time I wish, I can go up to 100. Now, if you can actually get that reduced as a commitment to, let's say, 60, then whatever else you can do, the knee-jerk response in response to any economic shock, at least that is prevented, because this love for protection will stop. I assure you that over the last 1.5 years, I have received innumerable requests. We are dying because of the crisis. Our demand has fallen out of the market. Please help us raise our tariffs. And we have consistently refused to raise our tariffs over the last 1.5 years. So one great achievement is pure banking of the gains in terms of tariff reductions. Second, there are huge distortions in agricultural trade which prevail today. And you will correct that enormously by the corrections on OTDS and the export competition. Basically, you will phase out all export subsidies for life, never to occur again. And you will make drastic cuts. I am talking of cuts of the order of 70 to 80% in trade distorting subsidies. Now, that is a huge cut, even if it is only on committed levels, not applied levels. Otherwise, you will again and again witness this business. All right, poor soya farmers are having a bad time, hike it up again. Cotton, the most distorted production system in this thing. 45% of the US price of cotton is pure subsidy. Who suffers? The cotton fall. So I think there's a huge gain to be had in pure economic terms, in terms of pure banking, of gains to be had. From a school of public policy perspective, I think the biggest gain there is, I don't know how undiplomatic it is to say it, but I think the WTO is about your last credible multilateral institution going. With due regrets to the Bretton Woods institutions, one has lost all legitimacy and the other is the less said about the better. So, meaning I think that, meaning I've heard so many lectures in economics classrooms and given them myself about regulatory capture. I think Washington represents institutional capture in the finest sense of the word. I will not say anything more than that. I think the WTO's greatest ability to survive as a multilateral institution is the ability to come into a room and say everybody has voice. No one guy controls it. And it's not about whether I like your face or I don't like your face. Thank you very much. If you're in breach of the agreement, I will take you to the dispute settlement body and I will get you clobbered. It doesn't matter whether I'm a Brazil fighting a US or an India fighting a Canada or a Canada fighting in the US, we will settle our scores. And we will settle them in a civilized way with a non-partisan judge. I think the credibility of that institution is at stake. And I believe that if we as responsible citizens do not help in get the Doha deal done, we will in the end erode the credibility of not only that institution, but of the value of multilateral institutions in general. What do you need them for? See, I've told you what I think about two of them. If this one fails to deliver, I leave you to your own judgment as to what you will feel about its credibility. I assure you, there are many in the developed world who think of Geneva very cynically in the WTO context, precisely because their voice has waned. But there's a difference between a waning of your voice and the fact that it still is a credible multilateral institution. And I think that is one very important thing that all of us need to bear in mind as we go along. It's very easy to say, I didn't get this, I didn't get that. Please look at a much bigger picture. The last reason I think you need to get it done, I think what's going to happen is that all these very ambitious trade rounds, which have set the moon or the sky as the mission, those days are over. The Doha round will be the last of those really very big rounds, embracing 25 things as a single undertaking, because it is just too large an agenda to bring to closure. So in future, my guess is you're going to see multilateral trade rounds which will be, in a sense, much narrower in focus or narrower in perspective, if only to contain what can be done in a reasonable time frame. Remember, we took 11 years, 9 years to get Uruguay. Punta del Este in 1986, 1995 was the WTO. We started this 9 years ago. We're still pretty much stuck. I think that that's the other reason you need to get this big round out of the way. The reason is what we would call a negative. If you don't get it done, leave aside the damage to multilateralism, where the hell are you going to get this trade liberalization ever going to come from? You'll spend another 20 years trying to get it done. What you can get done as a single undertaking now, you may not be able to get done in single pieces over a much longer time horizon. And you need to think about all of that. I've tried at least to answer 3 or 4 questions in the time I've spent so far. What was Doha all about? What we did after 2008? What we've done since then? Can the deal be done? Can the modalities be done? And why it must be done? Let me now enter a completely speculative field of what lies ahead. I think that what's going to happen in the next few months is frenetic activity. I've already told you that. For reasons of pure political compulsion, somebody is to meet a March end deadline, somebody has to meet a April deadline, and then of course there is this looming Toronto meeting of the G20, and it's very difficult to believe that ministers can once again go to Toronto, piously hold hands and say we must get Doha done. I don't think the world will take them credibly anymore. So I think they need to do much more than that. Let me give you alternate scenarios, some of which owe their origin to Geneva. For those of you who are not familiar with Geneva, there is nothing quite like an idle mind. They have nothing better to do than when they can't get a deal going, they speculate and they come up with these wonderful stories. So let me share some of these wonderful stories about the future with you, and you can form your own conjectures about which is credible and which is not. Conjecture 1. We will all wait till June. Nothing will happen till June. And in June, President Obama will do a Copenhagen on everybody else. Think about it. Conjecture 2. This is the beer drinkers from Geneva. We need a Doha Light. And there are 2 versions of the Doha Light. Let me explain Doha Light 1 and Doha Light 2 to you. They are different ideas or conceptions. The idea of Doha Light 1 was very simple. That was, look, you have too ambitious an agenda, which is why there's no deal coming through. Okay? So why not scale down your ambition? Which means, all right, I won't push the Americans into taking too large a cut on OTDS. I'll give them a cop out on the blue box and the product specific caps, in exchange for which they will ask for smaller tariff reductions. The Europeans will be happy because the lower their tariff reductions on agriculture, the better. They will not ask for huge amounts of carve-outs for sensitive products and tariff simplification, etc., etc. So they are happy. And the developing countries, well, everything else is scaled back. Their tariff cuts are scaled back. So, you know, the Indians and the Indonesians and all these BRIC countries, they'll start making less effusive demands on us. That's Doha Light 1. Okay? Which is scale down the ambition across ag and NAMA modalities and then move on. Problem. Some countries have already given up whatever they need to. Example, the Europeans have already implemented their cap reform. So they've showed their cards. Now, they want as much as they can for that. If they were to take less for that, they're screwed, because next time they come around, the rest of the world is going to ask them for the moon. So this is their one chance to get whatever they can. On tariff capping and tariff simplification, I'm just taking an issue to sort of illustrate. The Japanese, the Koreans, and the Swiss and the Norwegians have committed to a certain tariff cut, and they've already showed their hand. Telling them that you can get away with less is no good now, because they've showed their hands on other areas. So the problem becomes that where, example, agricultural exporting countries. Now, Brazil, Australia, New Zealand, they do not want Europe and the US to get away with with small cuts. They want large tariff cuts. They want large cuts in subsidies, and they want the removal of export subsidies, because they are aggressive agricultural exporters. So how are you going to get them to buy Doha Light on agriculture? They are fine with the Doha Light on NAMA, all right, have less expectations of us in terms of market access. But if they get virtually nothing in terms of market access for, Brazil gets nothing for beef, for sugar, for soya, and for orange juice, and chicken legs. I'm not joking. They control 49 to 50% of the market in these commodities of the world. International trade market is controlled by the Brazil. Now, they have got to have access on those areas, because that is their constituency. So that is why Doha Light becomes not so easy. Doha Light 1. Wait for Doha Light 2, more interesting. Doha Light 2 is, what's the management phrase for it? Yeah, grab the low-hanging fruit. Okay, that one. Grab the low-hanging fruit, which means, look guys, we've come to a deal here, and there's nothing in square brackets here, so they just grab it and run. Excuse me, that is narrowed down because I ceded territory on the expectation that you will get this to me. You can't run away with that fruit. I'll shoot you till I get that. So within a particular text, there are these compromises, and then across. Let me give you another example. Supposing you're telling me, India, hey, accept Doha Light 2, which means let the low-hanging fruit go. All right, in agriculture, tariff cuts, fine, I'll take it, that's closed. OTDS doesn't affect me. Export competition doesn't affect me. I can rattle through the clauses, they don't affect me. So if you lower the ambition in Doha and grab the low-lying fruit, it doesn't affect me too much. If you do it in NAMA, again, it doesn't affect me. But what happens to services? Because all I was ever interested in was getting market access on services. My interests, trading interests, were primarily defensive in agriculture and defensive in industry. Through unilateral tariff liberalization, I don't have a serious problem on industry. On agriculture, I have negotiated the best possible deal I could. But all of it is still defensive. Now, how do I go to my parliament and say, you know what, these guys grabbed the low-lying fruit and ran? I say, what is your low-lying fruit? Nothing. What the hell have you been doing for 10 years in Geneva? Okay? Now, that, I don't know if I'm oversimplifying it, but I think on a more serious note that everybody, meaning academics, policy thinkers, need to grapple with these issues. That look, is there actually a way out? Meaning, can we design a Doha Light one which is palatable across everybody? Because at the end of the day, if the compulsion is that you must walk away with a deal, and believe you, that is the compulsion, then we're all going to live, we're going to, let's sign the deal, we'll all carp about the deal forever and a day. But I assure you, the moment it's done, we'll go out and celebrate by drinking champagne. So why not just agree that, we're going to be very nasty to each other and crib and carp and be moody and crabby and what have you for the next 10 days, close the deal and then go and celebrate. But to do that, I think a lot of people need to do a lot of serious thinking on how to bring this to closure. Because if you do not, you run, in my view, a very serious risk to one of our major surviving multilateral institutions. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Khullar, two comments I'd like to make. One is that there's a great sense of relief to me as an Indian to hear this talk, because you're obviously a person who's deeply knowledgeable and engaged in the negotiations, and there could be no better person to be heading our commerce ministry. And I say that with a lot of relief, because it's not always the case that you can find the right person in the right place. And also a deep sense of gratitude, because for a public policy school, I could easily say that this is one of the most useful talks that I have come to, because you're giving us such relevant and practical insights into these policy issues. So with that, I would like to open the floor with your permission. Please. And if you would make a very pointed question, please, and do introduce yourself. And of course, Dr. Khullar has walked us through the entire Doha process. But as I also said, that Dr. Khullar is the person steering our entire trade policy. So if you, and he has very kindly agreed to.
Yeah, that's open season. Anything you want to talk about, so, I have no problem.
So I would open the floor. Yes, yes.
My name is Nitin Pai. My question to you, sir, is to what extent was 1995 a coincidence in the sense that linked to the overall geopolitical power situation? Because at that time, the United States was the predominant global power, and there were no doubts as to the international pecking order, which meant that forging a consensus was easier. But now you have United States thinking that they are in the decline, China thinks it's on the ascendancy. So there is an issue of flux. And do you think that a multilateral agreement is possible as long as this state of flux exists? Because, as you said, one very important point was, the developed world is cool to WTO because it means that their power is not recognized because they have to operate.
No, let me qualify what I said. I think what has happened traditionally in multilateral trade rounds were two things. Number one, if you look at the GATT rounds from 1947 onwards, up till the Tokyo round, really, it was the rich talking to the rich. It was a rich man's club. Where was the industrial tariffs that had to be reduced? What was the industry in your countries? Non-existent. So it was a rich man's club. The developed countries were negotiating amongst each other, please roll back your tariffs to give me market access. It's after the Tokyo round that things started picking up. Now, even at the time when Marrakesh was done, 95, when the Uruguay round was closed, by that time the developing countries had started acquiring voice. But at that point of time, the famous Quad, which delivered the deal, power was essentially US, EU, Japan, Canada, as I remember. And it was decided amongst them. There was a famous meeting, famous, notorious as the adjective goes, in a place called Lancaster House, where it was a deadlock even in the Uruguay round in 1994, and the Americans came to London, put a gun to the Europeans' head, struck a deal on, we'll give you this carve-out on agriculture, but if you don't do it, you're dead in the water. Deal done, they strike it, they go to Geneva, deal's over. The difference is twofold. Number one, yes, economic power is slowly shifting towards developing countries, very simply because the economic base has shifted there. What can you do? Agricultural and industrial production have shifted in favor of Brazil and the Indias and the Chinas of the world. You can't do anything about that. So, if they were mute spectators earlier when you were talking about industrial tariffs, perhaps they had to be because they didn't want very many industrial tariffs to worry about. Thank you very much. Today it's not that case. You want a chemical tariff reduction, I'll fight you tooth and nail because I'll get something for you in exchange for that. I export as much of inorganic chemicals to Europe as they export organic chemicals to me. Fact, today. I export as much steel, India exports as much steel to Europe as the specialty steel we import from, different tariff lines. So, it's not that the balance of power has changed. It is, since economic activity has changed, interests have arisen. Those interests are not going to go away. And with all economic power comes voice. So, it's not possible to say, hey, you know, we have struck this deal now, sign up. Sorry, you struck the deal with him, sign up with him. This is a multilateral institution, we do it multilaterally. And that is what has been going on for the last 2 years. Now, to be fair, there are about 22 countries all told. Okay, that's all. Leave aside the 153 I'm talking about. On NAMA, for instance, the Swiss formula cuts affects only 22 countries. Only 22. Of those, I can count on the fingers of my hand the 12 which are actually involved. And those were the 12 I was referring to earlier, who sat around a room. Because they were the guys who were taking the pain, they had to count their gain. So, what you're seeing happening at the WTO is not that its multilateral character has changed. It is just that around the room, earlier, he and I used to strike a deal and present it to the lot of you and say, sign up. And you would sign up. Now, all of you are more powerful than me and him put together. And all of you can take him on individually as well as me. And therefore, now you have to actually sit around the room and say, okay, let's work out a deal that works for everybody. That's why it's taking time.
What I found very interesting about your talk was this dichotomy between ministerial aspirations and then technocratic realities at the negotiating table. How much influence do the politicians have over this process versus, in a sense, and I don't mean in the sense that the technocrats are in any way trying to block or do things differently, but how much is this a technocratic exercise?
If you promise never to quote me again, I'll tell you.
My lips are sealed.
You can deny everything you said in this.
Look,
well, there is a
no, you can. The problem with trade negotiations is they are extraordinarily complex. Meaning, I don't even want to go there. I've tried to, as a matter of rule, I try to speak in general terms and simply, because it's very easy to relapse into the technical legalese of Geneva. the short point is that if you were to ask ministers to deal with technical legalese, the deal would never happen. I mean, it is just so way out of their league. And I'm not saying out of their league in the sense that they can't comprehend it. It's just that their time is better spent doing other things. Let me show you how a negotiation proceeds. Let me give you an example and you'll see what I mean. Special products. Special products are supposed to be tariff lines where developing countries will take less than the full formula cut on agricultural tariff lines where they wish to protect domestic livelihood or rural development or food security issues. Okay? Now, when the negotiation started in 2007, I still remember, exactly 2 weeks from now, 15th, 16th of March, I was in Singapore talking with my American counterpart and negotiating, and it was agreed. What was on the table was that we will ask you to protect 33% of my tariff lines. Let me give you numbers you'll understand. At the 6-digit level, there are about 700 agricultural tariff lines, so 33% means I was saying I will take virtually no cut on 230 tariff lines. That's what I was telling. And the Americans' response was, you can have 5 tariff lines. Okay? So 5 tariff lines, 230 tariff lines. Okay? We went to Jakarta and we had a huge battle in Jakarta immediately following that. We flew out from here. No great breakthrough. Everybody was there, all the ministers, Pascal Lamy. 1.5 years, nothing happened. And in February or March of 2008, they finally came to grips with it. And I remember I was in Geneva and I said, okay guys, we're going to settle for this. We basically said, all right, 12 to 14% of total tariff lines, with at least 5% tariff lines taking 0, which means from 233 I was down to 98, 80 to 90, of which only 30 lines would take no cut. Okay? Now this is what was negotiated, and I assure you this was negotiated inside a room like this after standstill for about 1.5 years in the space of 3 weeks. Notice where we go. A square bracket is around 5 lines to 230 lines. Suddenly it collapses to 12 to 14%, which means 84 lines to 98 lines. Right? Now we're getting there. Now I can call a minister and say, take a call. Okay? I cannot call a minister and say, settle 5 and 230. You can't average out 5 and 230. So what we have to do as negotiators is constantly narrow down the area of differences so that you're down to, let's say, the last 8 or 10. And then you ask ministers to do the trade-off. Okay, you want your special products? All right. Weinstein, we give you that. But you've got to give her what she wants. And she has to give him what he wants. Otherwise, there's no deal. So the conversation between ministers, notice, has changed from what? From what would normally be administrative to pure politics. See, this a minister understands very easily. Okay, I'm giving you this, I'm getting this. Right? Does he need to know, or does she need to know what lies beneath? No way. Please leave them out. Because we'd like to continue being friends. You can have your battles with your counterparts. So I think negotiation is naturally a process which, in that environment, is technocrat driven. Not because a technocrat is any better than or worse than a minister. I'm sure some ministers are much smarter than all of us. But it's not worth their time. And there is a time when you bring ministers in, when you bring 30 guys in a room and say, bang, let's close the deal. So that's the answer to your question.
You're very senior ambassador.
Ambassador.
I'm C. Chapman, Senior Advisor in Foreign Ministry. that also survival of the launch at Doha.
That's what I'm going to look like 5 years from now.
I have two questions to ask. One, you mentioned that at Geneva there are beer pub talk that waiting for Obama to do a Copenhagen. Why do you doubt that?
I'm not doubting it.
I mean, if you can do it in Copenhagen, why not that? Of course, it's not easy for him because he has to get TPA and it's a prime.
Let me give you, in a sense that ties into the Vice Dean's question. Remember, number one, doing a Copenhagen does not mean getting an agreement. Copenhagen is no agreement. It's a face-saving device to prevent a fracas. If Mr. Obama is able to do that, bully for you, but it still doesn't get you a deal. My question is, can you get a deal? The point I'm trying to make is, I remain to be convinced that even if Copenhagen was to be pulled, you will not be able to get a deal. Please understand, Ambassador, it is not that the leaders of the world do not want to get it done. It is for exactly the same reasons that I just explained to him. If the differences are so wide apart, nobody can bridge them. Sorry. Mr. Obama could definitely go into a room and say, let's not have a dust-up at Copenhagen. But I assure you, he could not extract a commitment as to what the degree of emissions would be agreed to, what the temperature increase would be agreed to. None of that. All you could extract was a promise to continue, and we'll come back and revisit it. That, yes, that can be done. But, Mr. Ambassador, sir, is that what we want? And that's the point I'm trying to make, that I floated that as an idea because I have thought it through. It's not that I have not thought it through. And I think maybe there's a germ of an idea there, which means if people are not listening, maybe it does require leaders to get together. But let me mention this to you. At two previous G20 meetings in 2008, the same idea was floated. The actors then were President Bush and Gordon Brown, both of whom were pushing get this done. And the problem was that inside that room, all the leaders with their Sherpas couldn't put Humpty Dumpty together again. That's the truth of the matter.
I mean, my second question is, can we break up a package and then work it, one by the minister meeting every 2 years?
No, I don't think that. It's because of the single.
It was an abuse because you recall the history. It was like the political round, remember, services and trips are outside the political round. So you think, okay, why don't we stick on to this same concept? Why not break it up?
I think that the single undertaking is too deeply embedded right now, and interests are very diverse. Let me give you examples. The Cairns Group, for instance, countries like Brazil, Australia, New Zealand, they have nothing to give in the NAMA, nothing whatsoever. They have only to take in ag, which means any tariff reduction, any cuts in export subsidies, any cuts in OTDS is all to their advantage. So if you let it done piece by piece, they will take their piece and run because they have nothing to give. It's when you come to areas like services, when they have to give, sorry, that I don't want to do. Now, call it whatever you wish, but for instance, Mode 4 in services, the temporary movement of natural persons, or for example, fishery subsidies. I'm telling you, I've been in the fishery subsidy negotiations. On the one side, you have very poor fishing communities of developing countries. On the other side, you have Japan and Norway who are objecting to the size of the trawler because they throw huge amounts at fishing subsidies, otherwise they will not have their supply of fish. But the whole purpose of the fishery subsidy negotiation is to prevent overexploitation of fishing, overfishing. And the small guys who are living off the coast of Sumatra or Java, they are not killing your fishing community, believe you me. There are lots of others who are doing it, but not them. So it's very difficult. The point I'm trying to make, sir, is that it is because different countries have different stakes, if you start dividing it up into little parcels, there will be some guys who will just grab and run, and they won't even care what the hell is going on. Which is why I said, meaning, I'm being philosophical, it's like you, I will sit down and hear others wiser than me speak later. But I guess that this is the last time you're going to have such a large single undertaking for exactly that reason. That's exactly why I said that. In future, my guess is they will be far less ambitious about the sort of multilateral trade negotiations they wish to become too complicated. Thank you.
Yeah, we have, maybe we can collect a couple of questions. Yes, you, sir, and maybe you, we can then take them together. Yes, please introduce yourself.
Edmund Sim.
We know you're a lawyer.
Yeah, I'm an anti-dumping lawyer. I will not ask you about that. My question is, to what extent are we complicated now because we now have, especially in some countries, a competing brief in that we have another game, the FTAs, in which you can run after the low-hanging fruit and not have to deal with anyone else. And to the second extent, are we also affected by a certain government who, I'm an American, so I can say this, a certain government which has no brief? To what extent is that affecting? Because, I mean, I'm one...
I didn't say it at all.
No, I'm on Ron.
Please focus in on him.
I mean, I get the sense that my own government does not have a brief on trade. And it's not going to have a brief on trade anytime soon. So, given that, I mean, my own view is that I don't think we'll have anything in this year. I don't think we'll have anything in next year either. And if that's the case, then what is the future of Doha?
Let me break up my answer to you in two parts. One on the clamor for RTAs and FTAs. In my view, even as that has gone on, there is no substitute for a multilateral deal. There is absolutely none. Meaning, I'm telling you the sorts of things. Look, I will negotiate a deal with, I've negotiated a deal with Singapore. I'm doing one with ASEAN. I'm doing one here. Bang for buck, I would much rather have one composite services agreement and scheduling. Bang for buck, I want a fishery subsidies which can be enforced universally. Bang for buck, I want a NAMA Swiss formula which cuts it for everybody. Remember the advantage of meaning in pure economics, trade switching versus trade creation. You know, the old, everybody knows that argument. And I think that in terms of trade creation, the multilateral solution is always superior. A bilateral deal will be part trade creation if you're creative about how you structure your deals, but otherwise it's all about trade switching. You know that and I know that. So that's the answer to that part of the question. Second is this. Honestly, I don't know. I have always had a great negotiating relationship, personal and otherwise, with my American counterparts. But very honestly, I am inclined to agree with what you're saying. Right now, we have just not seen any sign of, what is it you want done. I assure you that over the last 8 months I have been Commerce Secretary, I have made sure that at the highest level India is represented in every single meeting in Geneva. It doesn't matter if nothing happens, at the highest possible level I send my people out. And they all come back extremely frustrated because they said we spent 1 week in Geneva in a hotel room. We go inside a room like this and we discuss technical work which bores us to sleep. If not tears, but what do we do? And I've had bilaterals. I have spoken to the Deputy USTR in no uncertain terms. My minister has spoken to the USTR. I think that what is happening increasingly is, and that is why extraordinary pressure is bearing up on the US, that come end of March, this is what's going to happen. Inside that room, there are going to be all these guys, and they're all going to look at you. So, do you have something to say or not? because we are waiting here only for you. And believe you me, you don't want to be at that meeting. That's the problem. Now, that I think you've been very frank. I've tried to be equally candid. I think there are very big political problems. I mean, till health gets sorted out, till you balance out the Farm Bureau and the NAM interests. And I think ultimately till we start seeing a bipartisan approach all over again, it's going to be damn tough.
Bipartisan in the US.
In the US, yes. Right. I was addressing that because he asked that question.
So we have Hamlet without the Prince of Denmark, right? So is there any, I will then, that would be a...
I've got a very simple question, sir.
could you introduce yourself?
Yes, yes. My name is Isaac Jessery Person. Question is that, sir, in the context of known knowns and known unknowns, given your great exposure, the publics realize that, globally wise, they notice that the trigonomics remain to be there on the menu and never eradicated, never neutralizes or even extinguished once and for all. How long do you think that after the first decade of 21C, we're still having that problems and ongoing? What happened with professionalism in terms of negotiation? What's the problem with common sense? So from common sense point of view, what be your reading that, why it takes such a long time? And when you give the impression that OAS takes 6 months, then you think that you've got to replace with a better option rather than working on legality part.
No. Perhaps I didn't convey it correctly. I think that meaning 6 months is a very reasonable period for a lawyer to put that document together. I assure you, if you read that green book this thick, if you get through 20 pages in 6 months, it will be a miracle. It's please, let me try and respond. In common sense terms, I think the difficulty of why it has taken long to get to an agreement is because the agenda was extremely ambitious. That's the simple answer. Let me give you some idea of what's going on, and then you'll see what's at stake. In Uruguay round, agricultural tariffs were reduced by 36% in developing countries and 24% in developing countries. Developed 36, 24. And there were no line-by-line cuts, which was you arrive at a 36 cut, it doesn't matter what the hell you do. You arrive at a 24% cut, it doesn't matter what the hell you do. Today what you're asking the developing countries to do is cut your tariffs further by over 50%, 50, 51%, in exchange for which, up to 54%, in exchange for which the developing countries will cut theirs by 36. What you're asking them to do on OTDS, trade distorting support, you're asking the Americans to cut their OTDS by anywhere between 70 to 75%. And you're asking them, the Europeans, to cut their OTDS by 80 to 85%, which means if they were giving $100 million of subsidy, you're asking them, you will be capped out at 15. I assure you there is pain there. You're not only doing that, you're telling them, not only can you not spend total amounts, you can't even spend beyond this amount on soya. You can spend only so much on sugar. You can spend so much on this thing. This is driving the Farm Bureau, which represents farming interests in the US, up the wall. The cuts proposed on the agriculture text, December 2008, pick it up and you'll find it. Work out, plug in the numbers, you'll see. The cut proposed on cotton subsidies, or the cotton subsidy by the US, is 82.2%. 82.2%. And you have to do it. Let me talk about industry. The Swiss formula is a very complex nonlinear formula. What does it mean? If I have a tariff of, if I accept a formula number of 20, which is what is on the table as negotiated, and if I have tariffs which are 150 today, in the space of 4 years, that 150% tariff has to come to less than 18%. 1,000% tariff has to come to less than 12%. Those are the sorts of things that you're talking about. On export competition, you're saying, I, the European Union, swear that I will never use export subsidies ever again from tomorrow onwards. Never. And it doesn't matter who is coming into the EU or who is not coming out of the EU. Japan is being told you will cut your tariffs, even from astronomical levels of 1,500% to by 60%, which means you have to bring it down to 600%. And they say that we'll die if we have to do that. Norway has a tariff line. I calculated it. On one particular agricultural commodity, I don't want to name it, 3,000%. And they're being asked it will be reduced to 1,000, and they can't do it. They can't do it. I'm telling you, they cannot do it. Tariff simplification. Tariff simplification is the idea that in most parts of the world, tariffs are ad valorem. Okay? Your good costs $100, the duty is 10% ad valorem, you pay $10. Not so in Europe, and not so on agricultural commodities. It is €5 per flour plus $10 per ton plus this or whichever is higher. Better yet, for the tariff on this particular item, consult which month you're in and then go and consult that table. They'll tell you what the tariff is. This is the, excuse me, this is the real world. I am not joking, not an iota of exaggeration. And that is the answer to your question. It is when you have extremely difficult demands and ambitious agendas like that, which will cause actually huge pain to people, then negotiation is difficult. Let me tell you, between July 2004 to October 2005, there was one item discussed in the WTO. That's it, tariff simplification. And they went to Paris again and again, and till they finally came up with the Paris formula to determine how to convert ad valorem nominal tariffs into ad valorem tariffs. So the answer, sir, to your question is that it is just a very, very ambitious agenda, and I have not even described other parts of it. But take my word for it, it's extremely ambitious, and why it's taken time is all these changes will cause pain. When it causes pain, you have to go back to your constituents and bring them around. That takes time.
I think we can, Professor Lal from our school, who's a competitiveness expert here.
Can I just take you away from kind of the pure trade issues? Could you give me some examples of things that India is doing to take advantage of a more open trading environment? Because bringing tariffs down is one issue, but there's a lot of debate, particularly in APEC. And if you look at countries like Vietnam, so the question is not that that we have barriers to trade, but what can countries do? So the other way to think about this is to talk about what they call behind the border barriers. Right?
Okay,
so let's say you have a deal. What has India been doing domestically to kind of facilitate particularly goods trade?
Okay, first and foremost, I think trade policy has become far more transparent in India. And actually, Martin Wolf interviewed me 2 weeks ago to find out. Let me give you some examples. We have no such thing as TRQs. We have only ad valorem tariffs. We have no quotas. There are no quota restrictions. And our tariffs have come down to now in the neighborhood of 10 to 7.5%. Now, what I'm talking to you about here are bound tariffs. What is germane to actual trade is applied tariffs. India's applied tariffs today are not on par with ASEAN, but pretty damn close. Now, the India you may be describing is the India of yore, where tariffs were 100, 90, 80, even 35%. If you look at our HSN schedules, you may find tariffs listed at 35 and 45%. Those are bound levels. Those are not applied levels. Today, for instance, even as I fight in the WTO about protecting my agricultural interests, my agricultural tariffs on rice, wheat, sugar, pulses, all zero. Edible oils, zero. Actual applied tariffs. So I think that India has, by and large, lived up to the promise of getting its tariffs lowered and getting on with the business of getting people exporting. Let me give you a couple of numbers which may tell you a story. India's exports in 2003-04 were $60 billion. 2008-09 they were $186 billion, even after getting clobbered by the crisis. Our trade figures, and I'm talking 5 years, I'm not talking 10 years, okay? Trade as a percentage of GDP, that is, add exports, imports, goods, services, divide by GDP. In 2004, you are looking at a number in the range of 27 to 28%. 2008-09, 54.8%. 54.8% of GDP is external sector. 2003-04, in fact 4-5 you could even count. India's exports as a percentage of, India's trade as a percentage of world trade, exports as a percentage of world trade, 0.57%. 8-9, 1.87%. Look at the services side, I can give you the numbers. Now, I don't know whether that answers your question, but I know for sure that we are doing something right. And I don't know exactly what you want me to put a finger on.
Well, my question is slightly different. Okay, I don't want to talk about the border. So I'm sure that tariffs have come down, etc., etc. So I'm talking about behind the border, right? Because if I look at the goods profile, if I remove services, quite frankly, it doesn't look very exciting. Okay, so we are playing in areas like textiles, leather goods, commodities for the most part, if you look at the big items.
I beg to disagree, so I will not, I don't wish to enter into a debate, but I will gladly provide my High Commissioner with the numbers and he can provide them to you. There has been a huge diversification of my export basket. There has been a huge diversification of the markets in which they're going and a climb up the value-added chain. If that's the answer you're looking for, answer is yes. I answered that in a different context somewhere else.
And what about the domestic, facilitating the domestic supply chain?
You mean cold chain?
No, no,
yeah,
okay.
If I'm an agricultural exporter, it's important, for example, refrigeration. So it could be, basic infrastructure, it could be ports.
Okay. Primarily, our agricultural exports, if you look at them, have been in the nature of commodities, and these have been, traditionally these have been tea, coffee, occasionally sugar when there's a surplus, otherwise basmati rice and occasionally wheat. Basmati we are a regular supplier, and there I can tell you that we used to supply about 0.8 to 0.9 million tons of basmati to the world in 2004-05. 2008-09 it's over 2, this year it's going to be 2.8 million tons. Tea and coffee are doing well, not because the quantities are going up, but because prices are booming. Spices, we have been traditional exporters. Cardamom and pepper prices today are ruling the highest they have in years. Cardamom prices in Cochin today are at over 600 to 650 rupees a kilogram. The highest recorded price for cardamom was about 400 rupees a kilogram, and that dates to 2002. Pepper is going at over 150, 160. I'm talking top quality pepper. I'm not talking Vietnam low quality berry. I think we have invested extraordinarily heavily in all these sectors. There's a huge investment program through a special purpose vehicle called the special tea plantation fund for rejuvenating all the plantations in Assam and Bengal. I conceived that package about 4 years ago. It's actually, I've been in the ministry for long enough, so I speak with some authority. That is currently being executed. We have a huge organic program in place in tea. So now a very large number of farms or plantations on organic tea are exporting directly to Germany. So that's happened there. Other supply chain effects, a very large amount has been on the special economic zones. Just to give you a sense of the numbers, special economic zones, the total export in the first 3 quarters of fiscal 2009-10 is 127% higher than the corresponding period last year. 127% higher. The actual amount in those 3 quarters is roughly equal to $25 billion. And interestingly, leave aside the 25 billion that are coming there and the growth. This is when all other exports, my total exports, are posting a negative 20% growth for the first 3 quarters. So that is, it's not a full answer, but it should give you a flavor for the sort of behind the curtains action. If you need anything further, please tell me. I will be more than happy to request my High Commissioner to get the information to you.
Thank you, Dr. Khullar. I'm glad that Professor Lal raised that point because that gets us into the larger issues of trade policy, but obviously that needs a whole different seminar. And we did have some very good discussion on the Doha round. I guess the point that Professor Lal was raising was about our whole trade policy, should we build high value brands? Should we be moving up the value chain? And obviously the trajectory is very, very promising. So we are now thinking 200 billion, and then we obviously, and so now with UPA 2, and my hope and prayer is that you stay in our ministry long enough that you can give that direction to our exports that we really need. We are starting from that base of 180, 190, and we, in the next few years, we really need to take this into a higher growth path. But I say this without exaggeration that with you there, I feel very, very comfortable. I have this bad habit of taking notes when people speak and trying to summarize. This goes back to my student days at the D school, I suppose. So I'll make a very, very quick summary of about 8 points. My dean makes 3 points, but obviously I'm not as good. The first point that you made, which I think was very useful to us from a public policy perspective, is the whole sort of the world of realpolitik behind Doha. So it's, the textbooks and what Krugman says and what Ricardo said. So the whole making of the sausage, so to speak. And you gave us such a delightful and such an insightful view of that. The second point was that Doha is like the 1,000 or 1,000,000 piece jigsaw puzzle which must come together at the same time, and it's an all or nothing process. So I think that was a very important take-home point, and that we can't have a partial equilibrium approach. It's a general equilibrium problem, and so I have all this puzzle. I have to fit it together, and some of these unsolved issues from the Uruguay round are haunting us in Doha, in the Doha round. And then in terms of the process, you said that it was a start, stop, start process. So we started with the namaz and so on, and then we went back, it stopped, then it started. And of course, Hamlet without the Prince of Denmark. So the lack of engagement by the US is the biggest stumbling block. I know that in an interview you said you don't want to use the word stumbling block. Now Obama has been making these statements, President Obama in the State of the Union. But I think the ultimate point that you made was the US ambivalence about it, that in a sense it's still not, and as you said that there is no brief. So I think we really have that. But finally, you did tell us that it can be done if the process is started well enough, but we have 3 months and 28 days to save the world, or perhaps 4 months and 28 days to save the world. But, and I don't mean this facetiously, because as an economist, I deeply believe in the fact that Doha is welfare improving for the world. The Africans rightly say, don't give us these foreign aid, just allow access to our exports into the European markets. So what we're giving them literally is bananas, you know, when they want their bananas to reach the European markets. And you very rightly said that the Doha round is really necessary because it creates a bulwark against protectionism. It's the last man standing in the triad of the Bretton Woods, and so we must really think about it. That, you know, this is sort of the last of the Mohicans, so to speak, the last of the big rounds. And in your crystal ball gazing, you speculated on Obama, the savior. Obama parachuted into a forest of bracketed text in Copenhagen and tried his best. I think he failed, but that's my view from the environment point of view. You talked about the watered down Doha, the Doha Light 1, which is obviously not going to fly, because if people have already brought Doha Strong, then why should they go Doha Light? Or you talked about the low-hanging fruit Doha, but then, you know, you lowered the bow. Some people get the low-hanging fruit, others don't. So I think in sum, you really enlightened us on Doha, and we are very deeply grateful to you for sharing us with your insights and for your time, and for the High Commissioner, and for my wise dean, for my faculty colleagues, for you, audience, to be here, some of our students. I have been asked by my head of external affairs to tell you about our Masters in Public Management program. We have 2 of our students here from the police service, and this is a program where we offer very generous scholarships. It's fully funded, semester here, semester at Harvard Kennedy School. So we do hope that you will nominate some of the bright officers from your ministry to come. And with those words, I thank you very much, and please join me in thanking you.